Hey guys, it's Laura from Lightning Cosplay. Welcome to a new full costume making of video. The last weeks we worked super busy on a very cool project from one of my most favorite games. Capcom asked us to create an armor for Monster Hunter Rise, and you can't imagine how happy I was when we got the mail. I already played the game on Switch and I really loved it. It has a nice storyline and there are a lot of new monsters you can hunt to get awesome weapons and awesome armor sets. In January it was released for PC, and this means you can now play it in 4K, and this means you get even better cosplay references, so definitely check this out. You find the link in the video description. I was free to pick an armor I wanted to build, and this is the one I chose, the Nargaguca set, one of the most iconic ones, and I just really love the design. I mean, look at it, it's just so pretty. We managed to finish the costume in 27 days, and we not only built the costume, we also built the Nargaguca dual blades. So if you want to know how we brought everything to life, lean back, enjoy, and let's go. The first part I made was the pants. They have a unique shape and I love the design. Before we started to work on this project, we needed to buy some materials. We drove to a fake fur textile specialist in the Netherlands. They let us visit their warehouse so we could pick the perfect fake furs. To make sure I get the shape right, I made a mock-up out of a muslin fabric. Making mock-ups is a super important step when it comes to sewing. I was super happy with the shape, so I went on making the pattern for the scales. The scales were later digitalized in Illustrator for our laser cutter. It's time to get serious and cut apart the mock-up to use it as final pattern. For the upper part of the pants I used a dark blue cotton fabric. Of course my little palico Amy is helping me. For the lower part I am using this beautiful textured fake fur. To keep the pants in shape I also added some padding. I sewed everything together, and this is one side of the pants. The padding is only added to the upper part, not to the fake fur part. We cut out the scales with our laser cutter. For that we used 2 mm high density foam. The scales has kind of a fur-like texture. For this I used my rotary tool. It took me a while, but it looks super cool. To seal the foam I sprayed on several coats of Plasti-Dip. I painted the scales with my airbrush in different colors to get a nice color shifting effect. Before I glued the scales onto the pants, I first pinned them on to get the pattern right. To glue them on, I used good old hot glue. For more contrast, I added some white highlights. Next, I made the red border for the pants. Foam is an amazing material to imitate leather. This color combination of red, blue and brown on this costume is really beautiful. For this part I also used foam instead of leather. And a little bit of weathering for more contrast. The only thing that was missing now were the ruffles. This costume has so many details, but this is what makes this design so beautiful and unique. The border was now done. But before I finished the pants, I first made the belt with all its armor pieces. There are 5 armor parts on the belt and 2 dagger. The armor parts got a nice texture and were then sealed with several coats of Plasti-Dip. I used the same shiny blue metallic I used for the pant scales. I really love this color. Then I painted all the details. These weird looking nubbins were 3D printed, painted and glued onto the finished pieces. The 2 dagger looks like they are made out of very rough bone. For that I took a 5 cm thick foam block and just started to cut and sand and added details with a burning tool, until I thought this looks like a bone dagger. Again I sealed it with Plasti-Dip and gave it a nice paint job. The last little detail were the blue flake leather band on the handle. And here we have 2 nice looking bone daggers. The belt itself was made out of a rough linen fabric. It has some nice texture and it is my favorite fabric for weathering. Adding shades with a darker purple gives the belt more dimension. Ta-da! The belt was done. Because I wanted the knot at the front always looks perfect, the belt will be closed at the back. And this is the finished pants. It turned out so cool and is even more comfy than I thought it was going to be. I can even dance. My cat is not impressed. Let's go on with the leg armor. First of all, the shoes. I only could find fake leather shoes in black, but that's not a problem at all, I just painted them brown. To imitate the split front part, I covered it with a foam piece and painted it in the same color as the shoe. Time to make the pattern for the leg armor. I always build a paper dummy of the armor pieces I create and then cut it apart. Then I scan them and digitalize them in Adobe Illustrator so we can send the files to our laser cutter. With a rotary tool and a burning tool, I added texture to the armor plates. I taped all parts onto a cardboard, sealed it with Plasti-Dip and then painted them with airbrush. The leg armor has the same nice details like the pants. All pieces were then glued together with hot glue. I added some shades and highlights just to give the scales even more texture. The top part was also glued on with hot glue and then only the little teeth were missing. I made these ones out of 2 cm AVA foam. The carving was done with a rotary tool. Before painting, I sealed them with a few coats of Plasti-Dip and then gave them a nice paint job. I really love painting these textured bone parts. I couldn't find any brown rope, so I dyed it myself with fabric dye. I added all the details like the rope and the teeth to the leg armor, and this is the result. I think my favorite part is the split front of the shoes. I really love this detail. Off to the next part. It's getting fluffy. First, it all started with a super pretty pattern I made. I traced all parts onto a fluffy dark blue fake fur and cut them out. I sewed all parts together and then it was time for the fun part. I cut the scales into the fake fur. For that I used hair scissors and a little scale pattern. Before I worked on the final piece, I did some tests on a leftover piece. It takes a few tries until you get good results, so better have some practice before. You can also use hair clippers, but with scissors you get a more natural result. Isn't it beautiful? All those fluffy scales. And because I always want my costumes pretty from the outside and from the inside, I made a lining and stitched it on by hand. To get more dimension, I airbrushed the tips of the scales white. I also added some metallic blue color on top of everything for some extra shine. This looks so nice. And again, it was ruffle time. Making them takes some time, but it's all about the details. And this is the finished top. It looks so cool and still feels so fluffy. Creating the fur scales was so much fun, and I hope I can use this technique again for a future project. The headpiece was the main reason why I picked this armor. I just love the design. It all started with a paper pattern. I also made a pattern for the ponytail because I wanted to make the base out of foam. First, I made a mock-up of the fabric part to make sure it fits perfectly to my head. This, by the way, is an old life cast of my head. The base of the headpiece will be made out of this nice textured fake fur I also used for the pants. So I traced on the pattern and cut them out. I like to use a cutter instead of a scissor when I cut fake fur. Then I sewed all parts together. The headpiece also got a lining, which I stitched on by hand. Next I worked on the foam parts. I digitalized the pattern and cut them out with our laser cutter. This is the foam base of the ponytail. I completely covered it with dark blue fake fur. I added more fake fur straps until the ponytail looked like a giant rooster tail. To add more contrast, I did the same thing I did with the scales. I highlighted the tips and some areas with white airbrush. Amy is making sure I'm doing it right. Next, I made the armor parts. Having a laser cutter is amazing, but of course you need to know how to digitalize your pattern and how to work with a laser cutter. Again, I added all textures with the burning tool and a rotary tool. I really like the texture of the ears. All parts needed to be sealed, and then I could start to give them a nice paint job. The combination of this metallic blue and the red is just so pretty. The front piece and the ears were glued to the fur base with hot glue. And it's finally starting to look like something. I also added more fluffy fur to the sides and the top. The headpiece was nearly done, only one little detail was missing. This headpiece turned out even better than I thought. I was so worried that I would not be satisfied with the result, but it looks so cool. I love the fluffy ponytail. The bracers have a simple but cool design. We engraved the scale design with our laser cutter and added a 45-degree angle with a rotary tool. This worked pretty good. After sealing, they also got the metallic blue base coat. Some additional weathering to make everything even prettier. The lower part of the bracer is a fake leather glued onto a piece of 5mm AVA foam. As we already know, the purple fabric is for the details. This time straps. And don't forget the shading. Then I just wrapped the straps around the bracer and it was done. I made the whole thing big enough that I can slide my hand just right into it. So I don't need any additional attachment. Of course, I need some gloves. And again, it was nearly impossible to find brown fake leather gloves. But that's no problem, I can just paint them brown. Ta-da! Brown fake leather gloves. Next I made the pauldrons, but this is not a very interesting process because it's mostly sewing, so I go on to show you how we made the Nargaguca dual blades. We started by making a blueprint of the weapon. It's not only good to check the sizing, this will also be the pattern which we're gonna use. For the blades we used 5cm thick EVA foam, which is quite tricky to cut with our laser cutter without burning the foam too much. So we only let the laser cut about 1 cm of the foam and the rest was cut by hand. Then it was time to carve the base shape. I know you should not cut towards your body, but Ralph has a lot of practice and knows what he's doing. To smooth everything out, he used an accenter sander. For the middle part, which is supposed to be a bone plate, we used 2 cm thick EVA foam. Ralph rounded and smoothed the edges and also added some details. The most time-consuming part were the scales. For them we used 2mm high-density AVA foam. Before gluing them down, Ralph pinned all scales onto the blades with needles to make sure they are all in the right spot. Then it was time for gluing. Here we used contact cement. Next, the edges of the scales got smoothed a bit and got a 45-degree angle. The two blades without the scales also got their texture. Slowly the dual blade is taking shape. The handle and the long blade were connected with an aluminum rod. We did not make this weapon detachable because it will probably fit into a big suitcase, and we are not sure if we will ever travel to another country with this costume. After all parts were done, we used a lot of hot glue to glue everything together. To connect everything and make it look like one big bone piece, we used foam clay. Before we could start painting, I added some more texture to the bone plates and scratches to the scales. You already know what comes next, a lot of coats Plasti Dip to seal the foam. I gave the blades a metallic blue base color with my airbrush. The rest of the paint job was done with a brush. I used black and a lighter blue metallic to add more dimension to the scales. Normally I would paint the scratches in a dark color, but in this case they are getting a light sand tone and I love how it adds contrast to the whole design. To get a nice looking bone texture, I layer different brown, sand and white colors. With every color I'm getting brighter until I'm satisfied with the result. The handle got a nice Tsukamaki wrapping. With the help of Bob, I sewed the fake leather bands for the bone plate. I cut a little hole into the foam where I hide the endings of the leather strap. The rivets you see here were 3D printed. So the very last step is to give the rivets and the leather band some weathering, and then we are finally done. So, are you ready for the finished costume? Here it is! It's been a long time since I felt so awesome in an armor. This was such a cool project and I'm so thankful that Capcom gave us the opportunity to bring this armor to life. Also thank you to my community on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok and YouTube for all your support and following the whole process of this project. Maybe we inspired you to start your own Monster Hunter cosplay, and for that don't forget to check out Monster Hunter Rise for PC. You find the link in the video description. And before I say goodbye, I would be happy if you give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel and then hopefully see you next time. Bye bye!